Yeah. Yeah. Waterfront.
Okay, my name is Trista Sicard. I am a plumbing student from Mansfield. And first off, I would just like to welcome all of our distinguished guests and all of our students. Thank you for being here. Mr. Card, appointed in November 2000, served as Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush from January 2001 to April 2006. In this capacity, he coordinated the priorities of the administration's agenda, the development of policies, and appointments of cabinet secretaries and senior officials throughout the government. On September 11, 2001, Card is the one who whispered in President Bush's ear while the president was sitting in a classroom in Florida that terrorists had attacked the United States. Card then led a government-wide reorganization to best allocate resources to deal with the aftermath of 9/11 in the new terrorist environment. So, I would now like to welcome Mr. Card up here.
You are awesome. I am so thrilled to be here, and I'm Andy Card. I'm glad I can say Card in Massachusetts and understand it. And I can park the car in Harvard Yard, and people in Washington don't understand me. I'm thrilled to be at this institution because you are truly one of the greatest institutions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I want to thank the leadership from the school committee to the school to the classroom to the students for what you do. And the motivation that you generate and the excitement that you bring to me as the contributions that you're going to make to society are probably greater than you realize, because you are being trained to do real things as well as to think. And other people seem to be trained to think, but they don't know how to do anything. But you're actually doing things that'll make a difference. And so I compliment you. Yes, I'm from Holbrook, Massachusetts. Do you know where that is? The other side of Brockton. Okay. In Holbrook, we used to claim we were on the wrong side of the boundary, no matter which side of the town you were on. But Holbrook, it was a great town. I met my wife. I'm going to ask her to stand up. Please stand up, Kathleen. I met her in the 5th grade in Holbrook. From the 6th grade on, we were in the same classroom. We've been now married for 54 years, and it might just be habit for her, but it's still love for me. But I'm trained as an engineer. I went to the University of South Carolina on a Navy ROTC scholarship and was trained as a mechanical and civil engineer and worked as a structural design engineer. But I also grew up in a family where politics was not a dirty word. My grandmother had been a suffragette. She was very well educated for her day, and she was a teacher. She actually taught school in Brockton, but she was a militant suffragette who fought for women to get the right to vote. And so growing up, my grandmother used to talk about how important it was to be part of our democracy, and that it's our government. She said the most important word in the Constitution is the very first word, we. And she actually said, when I was your age, we didn't apply to me. But once women got the right to vote, it did. And she said, you've got to be part of we if you're in this country. But the Constitution is really an invitation. It's an invitation that has lots of privileges, and you get all the rights and privileges even if you don't accept the invitation. But she said, accept the invitation to be part of government. Accept the invitation to register to vote. Accept the invitation to vote. Nobody's obligated to vote, but vote. Accept the invitation to maybe run for office and serve on the school committee, or on the Board of Selectmen, or in the mayor's office, or in Washington, D.C. Accept the invitation. Join the military. join the public service. Accept the invitation. If you accept the invitation, then you're going to have obligations and meet those obligations. So I grew up thinking that it was important to be part of our country, not just to live here, not just to have the benefits, but to actually participate with the government, to listen, learn, and help and make a difference. And so that was how I grew up. So I didn't know that if you were an engineer and interested in politics, you were an oxymoron. Because there aren't many engineers that get into politics, but I'm an engineer that got into politics. And I don't know whether I'm the oxy or the moron. There are probably some people that I am definitely the moron, because politics does invite us all to have strong opinions. And I'm going to ask you to have strong opinions, but listen and respect other strong opinions, and then have the courage to find common ground. And sometimes that takes great discipline. But at any rate, we live in a great country, and our country is great because it's our country. It's not great because it's some leader's country. It's our country, and I think we've all got to be part in it. I'm standing before you because I have had a friend for over 47 years, Michael Petrosky. And he has been involved with your school for a very long time. And before that, he was involved at Stonehill College. He's still involved at Stonehill College. But I first met him with the political umbrella. And we've maintained a friendship for a very long time, and he motivates me. He motivates me to learn more about you and what you're doing and what your hopes and aspirations are. But I also know I'm not invited here just because I was Mike's friend. I'm not here because you wanted me to be here. I'm here because there's an iconic photograph of me whispering in the president's ear in a classroom. And most of you, in fact, I think all of you, weren't alive when it happened. It was September 11th, 2001. And it's probably in some of your history books. And it's an iconic photograph, but I am not iconic. It's an iconic photograph because it defines an era. And believe it or not, we're still in the era that it's defined. And I'm going to tell you about that picture. And it is a picture of me whispering into President George W. Bush's ear. But in order to give you the real story, I have to tell you what happened before I whispered in his ear. You know, the president, and first of all, I was chief of staff to the president. It's like an awesome job, but the president doesn't go to like Indeed or Monster.com looking for a chief of staff. And I don't know how he decided to have me as his chief of staff, but he invited me to be his chief of staff. And it's an unbelievable privilege to be asked to work at the White House and serve a president. And I think he probably asked me because I had worked for President Ronald Reagan, President George H.W. Bush, and then I helped George W. Bush with his campaigns and ran the convention that he got nominated at. And he kept asking me, I've got something else I want you to do. Keep your dance card clear. And I didn't know what he was talking about. Eventually, he asked me to be his chief of staff. So I'm kind of an accidental chief of staff. I was also an accidental academic because I was dean of a college. Then I worked as a provost at Texas A&M University, and then I was president at Franklin Pierce University. So I've been in academia. So I'm an engineer by training, I'm a politician by disease, and it's incurable. And I was an academic entirely by accident. But I'm not here by accident. I'm here because others suggested I should tell you about my path to being in that iconic photograph and what it meant. So September 10th, 2001 was an interesting day for the chief of staff. And I went to work really early in the morning. Chiefs of staff usually get to work between 5:30 and 5:45 in the morning. And I would get to work early in the morning. And I'd have to read everything that was going to be put on the president's desk because I had to read everything before it got to his desk. So I would get to work and I'd go through all this paperwork, and then I had this little locator box on my desk that the Secret Service put there, so I always knew where the president was, I knew what room he was in, and I could see it would flash whenever he was moving, and he's getting ready to go from the bedroom to the bathroom. I didn't ask what was going on there. And then it shows that he's moving to the dining room, then he's getting on the elevator, and I knew he's getting ready to come to work. And I would run down to the Oval Office, and the president would walk in from the Rose Garden, and I would say, "Top of the morning, Mr. President, it's a great day, no matter how bad the day is." I said it was a great day because I wanted him to come to work as an optimist, not as a pessimist. Can you imagine having a leader who says, "Follow me and things will get worse"? No, you want a president that says, "Follow me and things will get better." So I would always greet him as an optimist. And I would say, "Let me tell you what today's going to be like." And I'd tell him what his day was going to be like. Well, September 10th was an exciting day. First of all, outside on the lawn of the White House, picnic tables were all being set up because they were getting ready for a congressional picnic in a couple of days. So they had picnic tables were being all set up on the south lawn of the White House. And that was unusual because normally there would have been a big ceremony on the south lawn on that day where we invited the Prime Minister of Australia to come to the White House, and there was a big parade. But we couldn't do it on the south lawn of the White House, so we decided to do it at the Navy Yard, which is about 5 miles away. And I told the president we were going to have this presentation of a bell to the Prime Minister of Australia and celebrate the great relationship that the United States has had with Australia in World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, the Korean War, great relationship. And we talked about what the day would be like, and then he'd start working on his priorities on education. And then after we did the thing with the parade and the celebration with the Australian Prime Minister, we were going to fly to Jacksonville, Florida, and go to a school, and the president was going to talk about his primary issue, the one that he cared the most about, which was getting rid of this bigotry of lower expectations and making sure that no child was left behind. Public education for everyone. Opportunities to succeed for everyone. That was his priority. He said, "Great." And I remember as we got ready to go over to the Navy Yard for the parade with the Australian Prime Minister, we piled into limousines and we drove over there, and it was a beautiful day. And we arrived at this wonderful fairgrounds where the band would march, the military would march, 21 gun salutes, speeches from the president, speeches from the prime minister, and the presentation of this bell that belonged to a ship that had sunk and was presented to the president or the prime minister of Australia with gratitude for their partnership. And it was a wonderful time. I mean, pomp and circumstances, the military marching with the big bear hats on the top of their heads and all these things. It was just great. 21 gun salute, really fun. And then we went out to Andrews Air Force Base and got on Air Force One, a 747, really cool plane to be on, very nice. We fly all the way to Jacksonville, Florida. The president goes to a school, talks to students, talks to teachers, and then talks to community members about the importance of leaving no child behind. And then we piled into Air Force One, and we flew to the other side and a little bit further south in Florida, in Sarasota, Florida. And we arrived at dusk, and we're driving from the airport to a hotel or a resort where we were staying. And I remember it was like a very relaxed time because the president didn't have to work that night. He was going to go to a dinner with his buddies. His brother had arranged, his brother was the governor of Florida at the time, and we were going to go to have dinner with the governor and a bunch of the Bush friends. So it was a relaxing time. And we arrive at the Colony Resort. The Secret Service opens the door to the limousine, and we step out, and there was a terrible stench in the air. The red tide had killed fish. They washed up on the beach, and it stunk. I don't know why I remember that, but that struck me when we got out of the car. And we ran into the Colony Resort, dropped our luggage off, and then ran back out and got in the limousines and went over to Tampa St. Pete to go to this restaurant and have a nice, relaxing dinner. And the president didn't even have to stand up and take photographs with people. He didn't have to stand in the receiving line. He actually had fun, and he stayed out late. Something George W. Bush didn't do very often. He was like early to bed and early to rise. But he stayed out late that night because he was having fun. And we were driving back to the Colony Resort. It was probably like 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night. And he's teasing me because he says, "Why are we so late?" I said, "You're the one who stayed late." And he went up to bed, and I had to do some homework. So I went and did some work, and then I went to bed. I got up bright and early the next morning, and I knew the president was going to go for a run on the golf course at this resort. And so I went outside to check things out and smelled the air, and that terrible red tide stench was still there. And I tracked down the president's doctor, and I said, "Is the president going to get sick if he goes for a run on the golf course with this red tide stench?" And the doctor says, "Oh, no, he'll be fine. Don't worry about it." Then I talked to the advance team in the Secret Service and made some changes in the motorcade that had been set up as we were getting ready to go to a school. And then I went back in to greet the president as he was getting up. And he's getting out of bed, and he's starting to put on his running clothes to go running on the golf course. And he was all excited about going running on this golf course, but he was afraid. And I said, "What's the matter?" He says, "Well, I invited this reporter to go running with me." His name was Stretch Kyle. And he said, "I found out that he had been an NCAA All-American cross-country runner." And the Bushes are unbelievably competitive. They don't let the grandkids beat them at checkers. And so he's completely preoccupied that Stretch Kyle is going to beat him when he goes out running on the golf course. And that's all he was talking about. And I said, "Well, after you go for the run on the golf course, you'll come back, take a shower, get dressed, and then we'll do the CIA briefing, and then we're going over to the Emma E. Booker School, and it should be an easy day. You're talking about your favorite topic, leaving no child behind in education, at an elementary school." And he said, "Great." And then he starts going out the door, and I said, "Oh, by the way, the red tide stench out there, I checked with the doctor, and I don't think you're going to get sick." And he looks at me like, "You're an idiot." And he goes out for the run. And I go back to my office, and I'm doing work, and I talk to the CIA briefer and make sure we're all set for the briefing when he comes back. The president comes back, and he had, you don't remember this, you do, the George W. Bush strut, kind of the, he beat Stretch Kyle. And he was full of himself. He thought he was great. And he starts getting undressed, and I don't want to look. And then he takes his shower, comes out, and he's all spiffed up, and then we sit down and have a CIA briefing. The briefer was a guy named Mike Morrell. Normally we don't talk about who the CIA briefer was, but he went on to become an acting CIA director. Pretty famous fellow. And Mike Morrell gave a great briefing that day. It was not that dramatic. It certainly didn't say anything about terrorist attack. After the briefing, we piled into limousines to drive over to the Emma E. Booker School in Sarasota, Florida. And it was a spectacular day. There was not a cloud in the sky in the lower 48 states. It was a perfect day across America. The sun was shining. It was just beautiful. And we're climbing into the limousines and the Suburban to go over to the Emma E. Booker School. I do remember two people asking a question. One was Karl Rove, an advisor to the president, saying, "Did anybody hear about a plane crash in New York City?" And then the acting communications director on the trip, Dan Bartlett, said, "Did anybody hear about a plane crash in New York City?" And the doors to the limousine shut, and we drove over to the Emma E. Booker School. We arrived, the Secret Service opened the door to the limousines. We get out, go into a classroom that had been converted into a White House command center with secure telephones and communications equipment. And the president went to a secure phone and called Dr. Condoleezza Rice, his national security advisor. I didn't hear that conversation. I went into the classroom to see if it was ready for the president. And I walked into the classroom and I saw the second graders all lined up, and they were like in perfect behavior. Just perfect. Standing right, quietly. Their teacher was beautiful, and she was all groomed and ready to talk to them. She was telling the students how important it was for them to be well behaved and ask the president nice questions. And then I saw the press pool gathering, and the reporters were not well behaved. And Ari Fleischer, the press secretary, is saying, "Come on, we gotta get going. Come on, come on." And then I looked around the classroom to see if it was ready. I saw a misspelled word on a bulletin board. And I said, let's get a book cover and cover up that word. I didn't want a Dan Quayle potato moment. And then I walked into the holding room where the president was. And I'm standing in the holding room near the door to the classroom, standing with the president and the principal of the school, when a Navy captain by the name of Deb Lauer, who was the acting national security advisor on the trip and the director of the White House Situation Room, came up to the president and said, "Sir, it appears a small twin-engine prop plane crashed into one of the towers at the World Trade Center in New York City." The president, the principal, and I all had the same reaction. Oh, what a horrible accident. The pilot must have had a heart attack or something. I don't know why that's what came, but that's what came out of all three of us. And then the principal opened the door to the classroom, and she and the president walked into the classroom. The door shut, and I'm still standing in the holding room. And Captain Lauer comes up to me and said, "Sir, it appears it was not a small twin-engine prop plane. It was a commercial jetliner." My mind then flashed to three initials, UBL, Osama bin Laden. I knew about Al-Qaeda. I knew about Osama bin Laden. I knew about the first attacks in the World Trade Center that happened during the Clinton administration. And then I performed a test that chiefs of staff have to perform every day. Does the president need to know? Seriously, if you're a chief of staff, you get that question a lot when you're given all this information. This was an easy test to pass. Yes, the president needed to know. What would I say to him? I decided that he did need to know, number one, and I was going to pass on two facts and make one editorial comment. And I was going to do nothing to invite a dialogue or a question, because I presumed he was sitting under a boom microphone in front of a press corps, in front of second graders. I also reflected on another moment in history that you won't remember, you may. I was the acting chief of staff when President George H.W. Bush went to Japan in 1992, and he threw up on the Japanese prime minister. And I was all worried that the whole world would think he was dying, and I decided I'm the chief of staff, I have to make sure I do everything right. I took out my little laminated card, what to do in case of, and I did everything on that card. I was cool, calm, and collected, and helped the president that day. And I decided I was going to be cool, calm, and collected, helping President George W. Bush. I opened the door of the classroom and I stepped in. And I came in from behind the president. He didn't see me coming in. And I stood at the door, and the teacher was conducting a dialogue between the students and the president, saying, "Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. President." So this dialogue was going back and forth. In the press pool, I saw a reporter by the name of, what can I think of it? Ann Compton from ABC News. And it was unusual for me to enter the stage where the president was, especially to come in from kind of backstage. And she motions to me. And I motioned to her. And she motions back to me. What are you doing? And then the teacher told the students to take out their book. They were going to read The Pet Goat with the president. And when the students were reaching down to get their books under their desks, that's when I walked up to the president and I leaned over into his right ear. He never turned around to me. He just kind of zipped his head just a little bit so I could whisper in his ear. And I said, a second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack. I then stood back from the president so that he couldn't ask me a question. I was grateful that he did not get up and he did not speak to me. Instead, I saw his head bobbing up and down, and I knew he was digesting what he said, what I had said to him. I then stepped back to the door. I looked at the president. He was still looking forward, but his head was bobbing up and down. In my left peripheral vision, I saw the students. They all had their books open on the desk, and they were very committed to reading that story with the president. I saw the press pool in my right peripheral vision. All of the reporters were turned around, not looking at the president, instead looking at Ari Fleischer, the press secretary, except for two cameramen that were still taking pictures of the president. Then I looked in my extreme left peripheral vision, and I saw the principal of the school, the Secretary of Education, Rod Page, and a White House staffer in charge of education, Sandy Kress. And they were mouthing, "What's up? What's going on?" I then opened the door to the classroom and I stepped into the holding room. I got to the holding room and the first thing I said was, "Get the FBI director on the phone." It was Bob Mueller. He'd only been the FBI director for 10 days. I said, "Get the FBI director on the phone. Get a line open to the vice president, get a line open to the White House Situation Room. Get the crew back on Air Force One, call the captain of Air Force One and tell him that we're gonna have to get out of there." To the Secret Service, I said, "Turn the motorcade around, get ready to depart." And to Dan Bartlett, the communications director, I said, "Get some remarks written for the president. We have 750 people in a gymnasium / cafeteria, and the president will have to say something to them, but he cannot say anything we do not know to be the truth." The door then opened from the classroom, and in comes the president. I was very impressed how he reacted when he was sitting in the chair and I told him about the attack. He did nothing to invite fear on those very young students. He did nothing to demonstrate fear to the media that would have translated it to the satisfaction of the terrorists all around the world. He then walked into the holding room and the first thing that he said was, "Get the FBI director on the phone." And we could say, "He's right here, Mr. President." The president then spoke to the FBI director, spoke to the vice president, spoke to Condoleezza Rice, spoke to his national security team back in Washington, actually called the governor of New York, tried to reach the mayor of New York City, and then I went into the room where he was going to address the community that had gathered, and I'm standing at the back of the group, and the president comes out with the Secretary of Education, Rod Page, and the principal of the school. The president goes to the microphone, and he starts right off by saying, "Unfortunately, I'm going to have to be going back to Washington, D.C." And then he talked about the attack. It was a very brief statement, but I cringed when he said, "I'll be going back to Washington, D.C." And I got mad at Dan Bartlett, because I said, "Don't put anything you do not know to be the truth." And we don't know that we're going back to Washington, D.C. It turns out Dan Bartlett did not put that in the remarks. The president just said it. I ran out, I get in the limousine with the president as he's leaving the school. We're both in the back seat of the Beast. That's what they call the limousine that the president rides in. And I am on my phone calling back to Washington, D.C. at the White House. The president is frustrated on his phone because he's calling the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon, Donald Rumsfeld, and he can't get anyone to answer the phone. He's frustrated. It turns out the Pentagon had just been hit. That's when we learned about the attack on the Pentagon. As we get to Air Force One, the Secret Service opens the door at the airport. We step out of the limousine, And I'm struck by the sound of the engines on Air Force One already revved up and running. And that's a protocol no-no. The engines are not supposed to be turned on until the president is safely on the plane. So I said to myself, the captain must really want to get out of here. He's probably worried about Stinger missiles sitting at the end of the runway. He doesn't know what's going on. We run up the gangplank. Even before the door to Air Force One is shut, the plane starts rolling down the runway. And we lift off at a very steep incline, not the long glide path, but a very steep incline to 48,000 feet. And we start flying in a serpentine way, back and forth, waiting for fighter jets to catch up to us to protect us. And I'm talking to the pilot, and he says, "Where are we going?" And I said, "I'll get you an answer." So I tracked down the 2 military aides that were on the trip, and I said, "I want all of the options that would have a long B-52 capable runway, long runway, military base, very secure, within a 45-minute flight of where we are." And they came back to me and presented some options. The best one was Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, near Baton Rouge. And I found out that they were already on the highest level of alert just because they were having an exercise. I said, perfect. I told the pilot and the navigator, that's where we were going, do not communicate to the FAA, do not communicate to anybody where we're going or what we're doing. And the fighter jets are catching up to us. We come into land at Barksdale Air Force Base, and as we're starting to land, we could pick up the television signals of the local television station in Louisiana. And what do I see on the TV screen? But a reporter standing in front of Barksdale Air Force Base. The president is about to land at Barksdale Air Force Base. And I am upset with the people on Air Force One must have told somebody that we were coming in. I learned later that no, a cameraman just happened to be driving by Barksdale Air Force Base with his camera and a tripod. He saw Air Force One starting to come in for a landing, jumped out, set up the camera on the tripod, called back to the radio station and broadcast it. So it had nothing to do with nefarious acts. We landed at Barksdale Air Force Base and we went to a classroom in a building right near the runway. And it was frustrating in the classroom because they did not have good communications. And the president obviously needed to make secure phone calls back to Washington, D.C. So we decided to go to the commanding officer's office, which was about a half a mile away. We piled into a Humvee, and I remember the sergeant driving the Humvee is driving real fast, and the president said, "Slow down, I don't want the president to die in a Hummer accident." We get to the commanding officer's office, and the president and I did our secure phone calls back to Washington, D.C. We meet with everybody by phone. Ari Fleischer is wondering what we're going to do next. I made the decision to go to Strategic Air Command in Omaha, Nebraska, where we could go to the bunker deep underground and have absolutely phenomenal communications. And I said, that's where we're going to go, but we're not taking everybody that we've got on Air Force One with us. We're going to only take the essential personnel. So we took members of Congress and some of the guests that had glommed on, come with us, off the plane, some of the staff off the plane. A great debate took place about the press. Do you take the full press pool with you, none of the press pool, or some of the press pool? Ari Fleischer appropriately argued that we should take a representative of each one of the media that would cover the president. So we took a broken down group of press pool with us, and we flew to Strategic Air Command in Omaha, Nebraska. The president, all the time on Air Force One, really wants to go back to Washington, D.C. And he is adamant, and he's saying, I want to fly back to Washington, D.C. I kept saying, Mr. President, I don't think you really want to make that decision right now. I understand that's what you want to do, I just don't think you want to know it. We didn't know that if Air Force One would be safe landing at Andrews Air Force Base. We didn't know if Washington, D.C. was safe. The Secret Service was adamant that the president should not go back there until they knew what was happening on the ground. And we also, the pilot of Air Force One actually said to me, he may be the president of the United States, but I'm responsible for the life of everybody on this plane, and I'm not going to land anywhere where I don't know we'll be safe when we land. So the president is telling me we're going back to Washington DC. I was very polite to him. I kept saying, I understand that, but I just don't think you want to make that decision right now. He is then yelling at me, I am the president, we're going to make I understand, I just don't think you want to make that decision right now. No, I'm making the decision. Yeah, but I understand. I don't think you really want to make that decision right now. And he's very angry. The Secret Service is right beside me as we're having this argument. They agree with me, but they do not protect me. We go to Strategic Air Command, we land, and we go into a bunker deep underground. It's right out of the movies. All of these flat screen TVs, all of these admirals and generals are in the room, and you can hear all of the communication of the FAA and the military. And I like to say you could hear the fog of war, because a plane is coming in from Madrid and it's not identifying itself. And it turns out it was coming in from Madrid, Ohio, and it had identified itself. But anyway, the fog of war was very real. Is there another attack? Oh, we don't know, there could be what? So you could hear it, you could hear it. And it was awkward for the president because as he enters the room and is standing there, the military officers all want to stand for the president. So they stand up. They also want to sit at their computer screen and deal with the communication. So they sit down. So it was like a jack in a box. And the president says, this is too much like a jack in a box. I want to get out of here. Where are we going to meet? We went to another room, had a secure video meeting back to the national security team in Washington, D.C. And the president turns to me and said, can we go back to Washington, D.C. now? And I said, let me check. So I go out, I call the captain of Air Force One. Can you land at Andrews Air Force Base? He says, they're about ready to tell me I can land there. I go to the Secret Service, can we go back to Washington, D.C.? They were a little bit reluctant, but they thought they could handle it. And I came back and told the president that we'd go back to Washington, D.C. You should understand what it was like on Air Force One. First of all, the attack was terrible. The first attack was terrible. The second attack was shocking. And the buildings collapsing were an image that would never leave us as those buildings collapsed. You don't know those feelings. You may have seen pictures, but it was not a stage set, it wasn't a movie, it was the real thing. And watching people jump out of the windows of the World Trade Center because they didn't want to die being burned, they'd rather die jumping. It was very traumatic for America, very traumatic for everybody on Air Force One. And we wondered, is there another attack coming? And we're dealing with the CIA, and they're wondering, and we're wondering what they're hearing. There's some speculation that another attack was coming for San Francisco or LA. And the president is eager to get back to Washington, D.C. I will say this, on Air Force One, the president was remarkable. Without being told, although I think that he and Condoleezza Rice probably talked about it, the president said, I want to call President Putin in Russia. It was the first call he made after we took off from Sarasota. He called President Putin and said, this is what's happening here. We don't want you to think we're doing anything to stimulate a challenge for you. And we don't want you doing anything stupid to us. Well, we have to be in this together. He also called to check up on his wife, who had been whisked from Senator Ted Kennedy's office, where she was meeting with him to talk about education, and taken to a secure location in Washington, D.C. But the president was all business, making tough decisions. Probably the toughest one that I witnessed was as he's taking a call from the Vice President Cheney, and Vice President Cheney, and I was sitting right opposite the president at his desk, so I could hear the president's communications. I couldn't hear Dick Cheney's communication, but Dick Cheney said, would the president authorize our fighter jets to shoot down commercial jetliners that were not complying with FAA orders to land? And I remember the president giving his permission. I honestly believe that Vice President Cheney probably already gave that permission to the Defense Department before that, but I definitely heard the president confirm it. And I was impressed when the president hung up the phone and he leans forward and he said to me, I was an Air National Guard pilot. I can't imagine receiving that order to shoot down a commercial jetliner. I was impressed that the president had empathy for those who might be given orders to carry out that are beyond comprehension to think about. We ended up flying all the way back to Washington, D.C. We watched on television as the buildings collapsed. No one said anything on Air Force One. We prayed, we cried. I remember when Air Force One was coming to land at Andrews Air Force Base, there was a lot of tension. And as we're coming into you can see the runways, 2 fighter jets pull up, one on the left and one on the right. The planes protecting us were so close to Air Force One that we could actually see the faces of the pilots. And then we land at Andrews Air Force Base, and we get off that 747, and we pile into a helicopter that becomes Marine One. And normally Marine One would lift off from Andrews Air Force Base and go up to about 2,500, 3,000 feet and fly directly to the Washington Monument, and then hang a left and drop on the south lawn of the White House. This time, we only flew up to a treetop level, zigzagging back and forth down to the Potomac River, because it's harder for a Stinger missile to hit a target that is closer and moving in different directions. We get down to the river, Potomac River, and you can see the smoke billowing out of the Pentagon that had been hit. And I remember the president turning to me and saying, "That's the face of war in the 21st century." We hug the Potomac River and fly right down to the Lincoln Memorial. And then we pop up over the Lincoln Memorial, fly down the mall to the Washington Monument, hang a left, and then land on the south lawn of the White House. We get out of the plane, out of the helicopter, and we go into the Oval Office. And the Oval Office is being set up with Klieg lights and a camera, because the president's going to address the nation. And the rug is being rolled up, the presidential rug. And we go into a dining room just off the Oval Office. And at the dining room table is a team of his speechwriters. And there's a speech that's recommended for the president to give. And he takes a look at the speech and he edits it. And then he edits it again. Then he practices it. He gives the thumbs up. We all give the thumbs up. He then addresses the nation. It's a very short address. It was at 8:30 at night on September 11th. You should go back and read it, because it changed American foreign policy in this very short address. Summarizing it, basically says, this will not stand. And to every world leader, he said, you're either with us or against us. If you harbor terrorists, you're going to be just as guilty as the terrorist. So are you with us or against us? That changed American foreign policy. You should know that night, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya is the first person to call, I'm with you, I am with you, I am with you. Do not take me out. You can have my nuclear weapons, you can come and see everything. Lots of other leaders around the world called and said, we're with you. You know, President Musharraf in Pakistan is squirming in his seat. I want to be with you and I want to be against you at the same time. No, you've got to be with us. Some leaders didn't respond. Some responded by doing things that were not good. Saddam Hussein said, I'm offering a $2,000 reward for every suicide bombing family. North Korea said, we're not paying attention. Iran said, we'll see what we can do. But most of the world rallied. It was a short address. Then we went down to the bunker deep under the White House with a great big steel door, and we had a national security meeting. And some of the heroes of 9/11 were there. Norm Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation, getting all of the planes down that were flying over America. And gratitude to the Canadians that took literally hundreds of planes that were flying from Europe and landed in Newfoundland. And they took care of those people there. It was amazing. The communications that was done in that meeting covered the full range of responsibilities. Our allies, our friends, our enemies, getting things ready at home, wondering if there were other attacks coming. The president then, after a long day, was told he could go up to bed. And he went up to the White House, up to the bedroom. I went back to my office. I'm sitting in my office doing work, when all of a sudden, Secret Service agent comes barging in my office, literally lifts me out of my chair and starts running with me through the corridors of the West Wing. He said, "We're going to the bunker, we're going to the bunker, we're going to the bunker." And we get to the bunker deep under the White House. The great big door slams shut. The president comes down. He's wearing a robe, very silly slippers, carrying a pet. Behind him is Laura Bush. She doesn't have her contacts in. She's wearing a robe, very silly slippers, carrying a pet. They go into a bedroom. I go to a steel cot. And then the Secret Service says, a plane has entered DC airspace and it's not identifying itself. And so we're there for 15, 20 minutes. And then the Secret Service comes and said, it was one of ours, the transponder was not working. Mr. President, you can go back up to bed. The President and Laura Bush go back up to bed. I then go back to my office, collect my paperwork, and I go home. And I have not talked to my wife the entire day. It's like midnight, and she's a minister. Her church was right near the CIA, and she had opened her church up, the parking lot up for the CIA to use if they needed to use it, and people that come to her church and pray. And I get home, and I hadn't talked with her all day. I felt guilty that I hadn't talked with her and checked on her. I focused on the president. And we talked, and it was very emotional. And then at 5:30, actually at 4:08 a.m., I wake up at 4:08 a.m. every day. Why? Philippians 4:8, think of what is good, just, noble, right. Think of those things. That's when I wake up in the morning. Woke up September 12th, was in the office by 5:30, 5:45, sat at my desk, and there's this little device that the Secret Service put there so I know where the president always is, know what room he's in. And I have a whole bunch of reading to do because my job was to read everything that went on the president's desk before it went on the president's desk. So the CIA reports, the economic reports, the diplomatic cables, all of the reports. And I'm plowing through the reports. I come to the CIA document, the PDB, President's Daily Brief, top secret document, and normally it's about 15, 20 pages. I said, this is like the New York City phone book today. It was so thick. And I said, the CIA, they changed their initials today to the CYA because there was no analysis. And I'm plowing through it. I said, I've got to get this all read, got to get this all read. And my box starts to flash, means the president is getting ready to come from the west, over to the West Wing from the mansion. And I haven't finished everything, and I'm saying, oh no, what am I going to do? I run down to the Oval Office. I greet the president as he walks in the way I would always greet him. Top of the morning, Mr. President. It's a great day. I'm glad you're the President of the United States. Again, I wanted to be an optimist. And he said, I said, let me tell you what your day is going to be like. And I started to tell him what his day was going to be like. And he interrupts me. He says, I'll tell you what my day is like. Okay, Mr. President, what do you want to do today? He said, I want you to get the FBI director over here this morning to brief me. You all think, what's the big deal? The truth is, you're too young to remember it. You're not. After Watergate, FBI directors did not come to the White House that often to brief the president. They came to be part of a greater pool, but you didn't want the president to be perceived as influencing the FBI director. So it was very unusual for the FBI director to be called to come over for a briefing. But I said, all right, Mr. President, we'll do it right after the CIA briefing, and we'll get ready to go. He said, all right, great. Then he sat at his desk, and I'm going to digress a little bit here. He did this every morning that he came to work. wasn't just on 9/11. He sat at his desk, and sitting right in front of him is that President's Daily Brief document, which is that top secret document that everybody in Washington wants to see. It's prepared for the president, and it's there. He sits down, and he doesn't open that first. Instead, he opens a drawer by his desk, he opens it up, and takes out a Bible, takes out a devotional, reads his devotional, reads a little bit of the Bible, puts it back in the drawer, says a prayer, and then he goes to the PDP. That's how he started that day. That's how he started every day I was with him. So that was 9/11. I'm glad to tell you about it. It is a picture in a book. You may have seen pictures on 9/11, the 20th anniversary. Please never forget. Those of us who were alive when it happened made a promise never to forget. 3,000 people died that day. Thousands of young people joined the military because of that day, joined the CIA because of that day, joined the emergency services, whether policemen, firemen, or EMTs, because of that day. Sacrifices were made that nobody would invite on anybody, and we promised never to forget. Never to forget. We won't forget. Please make sure you know enough never to forget and pass it on. With that, I'll open it to questions, and you can ask me any question you want, so I'll try to be more efficient than I was with my presentation. Yes, right here. Speak loudly, because I'm an old man with hearing aids.
Hi, my name is Kendall Saint. I'm from Brockton, Massachusetts. My shop is in machining. And one of my questions is, do you think the current administration would be prepared for a crisis the scale of 9/11?
Do I think that the current administration would be prepared for a crisis on the nature of 9/11? Better prepared than we were. In part because of the attacks on 9/11, government was reorganized. We did not have a Department of Homeland Security. We didn't have TSA checking people when they get on planes. We didn't have an intelligence community that was talking amongst the other intelligence communities. We had silos. All of that was changed. And so President Bush reorganized government, and as a result, Congress had to reorganize a little bit to decide how to communicate with the Homeland Security Department. For example, the Coast Guard got moved from the Department of Transportation to the Department of Homeland Security. Immigration got moved from the Justice Department to the Homeland Security Department. So I think the government is better organized to deal with an attack, and we have multiple entities of government focusing on potential next attacks. So we have, I don't want to call it redundancy, I call it being smart. And so the president created a national a DNI, Director of National Intelligence, that oversees all of the intelligence communities where they were siloed before and they didn't talk to each other. Sometimes it was until it was too late. And there was a 9/11 report that made recommendations, and virtually every one of them was adopted. So I do think that the government is better prepared to deal with the 9/11 attack. Then you're getting to the question, do I think they could do the job? I do, but I'm an optimist. There are some things that are happening that I think have exacerbated and challenged us today. I think the withdrawal from Afghanistan was premature and maybe allows now terrorist organizations to remobilize inside Afghanistan. And so I'm very worried about Afghanistan again becoming a place where terrorists could find safe harbor to plan attacks on us. You know, some people think pulling out of Afghanistan meant we lost. We actually didn't. The mission was accomplished. Afghanistan was not a place where terrorists were harbored during the time that we were there. We were monitoring, America was safer to the 20 years. And so to those who served in Afghanistan, your service made a difference. It made a difference. America is safer because of what happened while you were in Afghanistan. But I do worry about how we withdrew from Afghanistan. I'm terribly upset that the Taliban is leading that country. First of all, I don't think they're good leaders. I don't think they have the best interest of their people in mind. I think ideology trumps, no pun intended, trumps what they think about their people. And And so I'm very worried, and I'm particularly worried about all of the gains that were made in Afghanistan that were so important, especially for women. Especially, my wife is a member of the U.S. Afghan Women's Council and has been for a long time, and she's been to Afghanistan. And it's sad to see what's happening because women are now denied opportunities to participate in their economy and in their government and in life. And so it's traumatic for me. But yes, the bottom line is, yes, I think America is able, through its institutions, to protect us better than they were prior to 9/11. Next question. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions.
Hi, my name is Jason, and I'm from the city of Brockton in medical assisting.
Does the Brockton crowd all have to sit together?
So my question to you is, what is one mistake in your career that ultimately reshaped your way of thinking?
What is a big mistake in my career? Wow. Probably, gosh. If you haven't made mistakes, you haven't lived life. So I am not perfect, and I'm not even sure I'm working as hard toward perfection as I should. But I can think of lots of advice that I gave the president, or I echoed advice that I now think was flawed. I can rationalize them very well, to be honest with you, because it's easier to have, I'm going to say, the ability to look back and say, I wish I had known, I would have done things differently. But you don't have that luxury. And I feel bad for every president because they make brutally tough decisions, and they have to make them within a time frame that also considers what time it takes to implement the decisions. So a decision in the Oval Office doesn't mean anything unless it's implemented. And the White House doesn't get to implement anything. Every decision made in the White House is implemented by somebody outside the White House, another department. So those are frustrating. But the awkward ones, the question of using, quote, black sites and techniques to try to get information, those are tough decisions. Abu Ghraib, which was not a decision made by government, it was a decision made by people on the ground. And you don't know what Abu Ghraib was, but it was a horrible situation where prisoners taken in Afghanistan were tortured and beaten and shouldn't have been. And so I look at those and say, why didn't we know about it? What should we have done? People should have been held accountable in the government for doing that. The president was not in that decision chain. How do we make changes? It's funny. I think I've made more mistakes out of ignorance than out of motive. And so mistakes are not seeking, I don't like monolithic thinking. It used to trouble me when people would come to my office and breathlessly say, we've got to see the president, this is what he's going to do. And I'm going to say, first of all, is this a government decision or is it a presidential decision? Because if it's a government decision, somebody else in government should be making it. The president will own the burden, but the president should not waste his time making a government decision. He's got to make a presidential decision. And if he's making a presidential decision, it by definition has to be really hard. So if all of you agree with the answer, something's wrong. There must be some contrarian view, or there must be some other view, and you've got to find somebody with it. You've got to challenge each other. I happen to believe in the discipline, I call it the discipline of the P's. Policy is like unbelievably easy to make up. You make up policy almost every day. I could do this, but government should be doing this, and you come up with a policy. And so policy is easy to make up. So I would challenge people who are coming in with their policy and say, please tell me what principle that relates to the president's priorities this falls under. You know what principles you believe in. Where does your policy fit under that principle? So I can go, it's well grounded in your president. Like President Bush, one of them was leaving no child behind in education. Does this help pull kids out of poverty? Does it help make a difference? So I would say, I want to know the principle that relates to it. Then I want to know who are the people that will be impacted by the policy. I don't need to know their names, but I need to know their people. I've got to tell their stories. If we don't know the people that our policy is trying to help, we probably do not have the right policy. So who are the people? How will they be helped? Who are the partners that will not be helped directly by this policy, but will recognize it's the right thing to do? Because it's really hard to get a policy in place if you don't have partners getting it there. So you got to think about that. What process did you go through to write this policy? Did you think about the people who have to implement it? Or did you just think of the policy? How is it going to be implemented? Where will it be implemented? Who is accountable for it? How do we know what their accountability looks like? You've got to tell me how it's going to be implemented and who's going to do it. Then you're going to have to tell me what is the process that you went through to consider all of the consequences to the policy. Obviously, you want the consequences to be good. Tell us what they are. What are the consequences that are potentially not good? And to the extent possible, have you really sifted through, by talking to the people that have to implement the policy, what the unintended consequences might be? And it's amazing how many people don't think about that. You want as few unintended consequences in policy as possible. Because if you don't think about that, your policy will probably be defined by an unintended consequence. And then I would say, is this a presidential decision? Because if it's a presidential decision, the president will have to take time to study it and make the decision. How much time does he have? And who are the people that will help to educate him? And they can't all echo your views. They've got to challenge your views. And so that was my definition of how I would go through the day. But there were times when I think probably I didn't bring enough discipline to that policy, and the president made decisions, maybe prematurely, which is a P word too, I could put that in my list. And you know, it's kind of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You want the porridge to be the exact right temperature. If the president makes a decision too early, it may be stale by the time it's implemented. If he makes it too late, it's irrelevant. So you're always looking for, when does the policy need to be announced? When does it need to be implemented? And what is the process for implementation? Does it require Congress? Does it require publication we're changing alpha to beta in the GSA language? What do we have to do? So those are the things that, and you do get tempted when you're working at the White House to think everything is an emergency. And sometimes you have to step back and say, no, where does this fall in the priority of things that need to be done today? And what do we need to look at so we can do it right tomorrow? So mistakes being made in, like one time, I can remember an embarrassing mistake, it's not a big deal. This was soon after 9/11. The president I think he'd gone to a hospital or something in DC to visit some of the wounded. And he came back and he was still in the limousine. I'm out in the south lawn of the White House when the limousine drives up and the staff is getting out of limousines. I get in the car beside him and say, we may have to go to the bunker. There's another threat to the White House, and I'm telling him this. And it turns out the press watched me getting into the limousine with them. The door gets shut. I'm talking to them, so everybody in the press is saying, "What's the chief of staff talking to the president about? What's going on here?" And the truth is, I shouldn't have done it that way. I should have let him get out of the limousine in the normal way, go into the White House, go to the Oval Office, or go to the Situation Room, and then talk to him about the problem. So that was mistaken. I felt embarrassed because people were right. Something's going on. That's very unusual for the chief of staff to do that. So yeah, I don't want the list of all my mistakes to define me, but it probably will someday. The one thing this caused me to say something. This is current events. Colin Powell, who was an amazing American patriot, just one of my true heroes, just died. And you've probably seen all the coverage of it. He was a remarkable man, and his wife is a remarkable woman, and my wife and his wife are friends. And I've known Colin Powell since 1983. Think very highly of him. He and I did have our arguments when he was Secretary of State and I was Chief of Staff. appropriately had to challenge each other. But he is being defined today not just by the remarkable service he gave to the military, as a diplomat, as a leader, and a conscience. He's also being defined by what he said before the United Nations, before he went to war in Iraq. I feel it's terrible that he's defined that way. It's terrible. Because everything that he said that day, he believed in when he said it. It proved not to be true later on. But there wasn't anybody that I know, not anybody, even in other governments, that thought what he said that day wasn't what our intelligence had suggested. So he did not spread false news maliciously. Did he have perfect knowledge? No. Is intelligence ever perfect knowledge? No. That's one of the challenges. But it was kind of like, I said this to another group, he went to the UN kind of presenting as a prosecutor would present to a jury. He laid out a case for going to war in Iraq and the atrocities that Saddam Hussein could invite on us. He did it kind of the way he would present to a jury. The defense never said a word. Saddam Hussein's version of that challenge was never addressed by the UN. Saddam Hussein didn't say, I don't have weapons of mass destruction. In fact, he wanted the world to believe he did, especially Israel and Iran. So I just feel bad that Colin Powell is being not fully remembered for the magnanimous responsibility that he met in so many areas, and not the least of which, when he left government service after serving as Secretary of State, his last assignment, actually had one after that. He went and also served in Haiti for President Clinton, helping after the first Haitian boat lift challenges. But anyway, he went and he founded something called the Little Red Wagon, part of America's promise, to make sure kids were taken care of. And he founded that, he led it, he funded it, and he did a remarkable job. So he was a true point of light in addition to being a great military leader, a great national security advisor, a great Secretary of State and diplomat. So I'm sorry. Next question. Yep.
My name is Josephine. I'm from Norton, and I'm in the Automotive Technology program. And my question is, do you think our TSA measures at security at airports is effective these days?
Do I think, boy, I'm not a big fan of standing in line at the airport. And you should know I get treated exactly the same way you do, which is not well. And I'm frustrated. But I think it's important. You're too young to remember this, but because TSA has been around your entire life. It's not been around our entire life. We used to go to the airport and you could arrive 10 minutes before the plane left and still get on the plane. You could greet your loved one when they get off the plane at the gate. You could give them a hug, you could give them a brownie as they were getting on the plane to take off. You could do all that stuff. I remember my wife, when I came home, I get off the plane, she's standing on, this was when it wasn't in the terminal, it was outside on the runway. She was out there greeting me when I got off the plane. I was running after her and then I fall down like an idiot. But anyway, yes, we can't do that. TSA, unfortunately, is needed. I think technology is getting better and better all of the time, so machines can sniff. Dogs still go around sniffing, they make a difference. But the TSA still has to do its job, and that's why it's important for us to cooperate. It's so sad, in a democracy that is a we the people democracy, please do not think that it's we against the government. It's not. The government is part of us. So to the extent that we can accommodate our government doing difficult things for the greater good is noble. So I don't like wearing a mask, but I wear a mask. Okay. I have a shot. I respect TSA. I understand that it's important for us to protect ourselves, but it's even more important that we protect others. So I think TSA is going to be with us forever. Israel has done TSA work for a long, long time, and we've studied them, and they do it quite well. I just think we have to, it's part of reality. One more question, and then I gotta go. Mike is giving me.
I'm Catalina Almeida. I'm from Easton, and I'm in the plumbing shop. And my question is, which of your roles as a politician was the most challenging and why?
What rules?
Roles.
What roles in politics have been the most challenging? Well, being an elected official is much more challenging than being an appointed official. And the school board members are elected officials. And they represent everyone in their district. They represent smart people and not so smart people, angry people and happy people, tall people and short people, and everybody in between. And so I think the greatest challenge in democracy is when you recognize that we are a representative democracy, and those who we represent are very important. So I'm praying that the members of the school committee actually listen to all of their constituents, knowing that they won't all agree. And if they all do agree, something's wrong. So they have to listen with respect, but then have the courage to lead and do what they believe is the right thing, even if it may upset their constituents. So, yes, I was elected to the planning board in Holbrook right out of college. I loved being an elected member to the planning board in Holbrook. I learned a lot from it. I also served on the permanent school building committee. I was active in town meeting. I was very active. I ran for state representative, got elected state representative for Holbrook and Braintree, then Holbrook, Abington, and Whitman. I was the Republican whip. There aren't many Republicans to whip in the Massachusetts legislature. but probably representing constituents is tougher than being an administrator appointed by the process, because administrators really don't have to represent anybody except the government's responsibility. So they're given responsibility by people who are elected, and then they have to implement those policies consistent with the expectations that the governor, the president, the school committee suggested. So I think serving in elective office, but I encourage people to do it. I really encourage you to do it. And please help polish our democracy. Our democracy is very, very tarnished today. And I talked to another group, they're going to leave with this, you know, my grandmother just, who had the huge influence on my life, suffragette and all that kind of stuff. She said, one of the things that she would remind me to do all the time, because I needed to be reminded, taste your words before you spit them out. Too few people taste their words before they spit them out, and almost nobody licks their thumbs before they tweet them out. And if you tweet out something, or you email something, or you Facebook something, it never goes away. You own it. And an employer 10 years from now might find it and say, whoo, scary, don't want anything to do with them. Right. Taste your words before you spit them out. It'll make you smarter. The other thing is, don't leave the room until you go out the door. Most of us, including me, are so arrogant. We walk into a room, we think we know what we're talking about. We say, this is what I think about. I go on and tell you what I think about. And then I sit down, and somebody gets up to say what they think about, and I doodle, I daydream, I don't pay attention. And the meeting comes to an end, and I feel good because I was so smart and told them all everything I knew, and they didn't need to listen to anybody else. I didn't listen to anybody else. And my grandmother would say, you walked out dumber than when you walked in, because you gave something away and you didn't take anything in. So don't leave the room until you go out the door. Pay attention to every person who speaks. Respect every person who speaks. You'll learn something, and they may learn something, and guess what? They will love that you paid attention to them. And to an elected official, I'll say, pay attention to them. Even if they disagree with you, pay attention to them, and they will have greater respect for you. So with that, I've overstayed my welcome. Please join in the exciting experiment called the United States of America. We've got the best democracy in the world. Make sure that you celebrate it by participating in it, and do not hate. Do not hate. Love is more powerful. Unfortunately, if you run for public office today, most people have to run generating fear of their opponent. Vote for me because the other guy is so scary that you could never put up with him. I'd like to say you could run and say, vote for me because I love you and I want to do a good job for you. But it doesn't always work that way. But if you can give people the benefit of the doubt and help people get smarter. My wife has a great way of saying, when people would argue with me and I'd want to just jump down their throat, and she'd say, step back, just remember, you can always say, I never thought of it that way. How did you come up with that? And then you learn that there are better ways to do things. God bless you. Thank you very, very much.